Welcome back, Annette. A lot has happened since the last time we had a chat, and there's a lot to delve through. But let's just start with the simple stuff and the basics, and we'll get into it. So the first thing I want to talk about, because of what we've been discovering and looking into, all the symbolism and all the patterns that we're recognizing, we're both very convinced that this has to be a simulation. It just has to. Can you explain why you think that is? What is it that we're seeing that gives us the idea that this is a simulation?
When you start on the symbolism path, you think that things have been chosen to represent other things. You get to a point where you realize things have been designed to represent other things. When you go down this path as deeply as we have, and a lot of our followers have, there is no doubt in your mind that this is a simulation because you realize everything has been created far too perfectly. There's too many coincidences. When you realize everything's been designed to represent something else, how else do you explain, like, how else can you explain that but to say that it must be a simulation?
Because when we look at even to the finest details, such as insects, animals, geographic locations, seasons, the way the earth has formed itself, and every intricate detail about this realm, it all fits, right? It's hard to explain, but when you see it the way we do, you just get it and you see it everywhere.
It's also very liberating because when you've been on the path, the truth-seeking path, and what people are doing almost on a daily basis is basically complaining about everything that's wrong and all the deception and the propaganda and whatnot. The buck always seems to end with like Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, this, that, and it's always people. It's always the buck always ends with people. And when you realize, oh my gosh, it's not just symbolism in the movies, in the media, in the political events, the world events, the royal family, this and that. When you realize it's in your body, it's in the animals, it's in nature, and it's in the seasons. Like, does Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab have a say over where the sun is positioned in the sky at a certain time of the year? So why are we still on that merry-go-round of thinking that if we can just get rid of these scumbags, then everything will be okay? It's one thing to go down the simulation theory rabbit hole. Not that I've read the whole book yet, but the holographic universe, this is like apparently like the ultimate book. When you realize for yourself that it's a simulation, and I don't mean when you study simulation hypothesis or simulation theory, I mean when you realize it for yourself because you can see it, because it's the only thing that makes sense, because you can see symbolism. When you can start, even just begin to look around and see that everything is designed perfectly to act, to represent something else, once you even begin that journey, it's a game changer because your energy has to shift. No longer are you looking at Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab. You actually start to realize actually that these people actually are serving as symbolism themselves. You start to ask yourself new questions. So if the construct is deceiving us and not just some elites or a bunch of human beings that are in control of our society, obviously, whatever created this is allowing this illusion to exist. You ask yourself different questions. You start to ask yourself, like, why has it been allowed? Because you could go and, put a stop to the new world order and the one world government and cashless society and digital ID and all that stuff. Okay, if you want to chase that and you want to, spend your life protesting against that and all that stuff, fine. But what are you going to do when you realize that that's not the end of it and that it's so much bigger than that? Essentially, it's the construct. It's not people. It's the construct. It's the design of this simulation, this matrix that allows us to be fooled into thinking that this world is something that it isn't. You start to ask different questions like, what do I need to do to fix it? What do I need to do to escape it? It sounds cliche, but it leads to the realization that the change has to start within you.
Mm. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who will say, well, God's design is perfect and God created this realm And that's why it's so perfect and everything lines up and it's sacred, and that's why it is the way it is, and it all matches and fits, right? But then I think about the suffering that's here as well. And so how does that fit into this? Did God create a realm that's full of suffering and collective punishment, as we're seeing? And a lot of the issues that are here, is that what God is? That's what I'm confused about.
So what I'm seeing in the symbolism, what I see that like it's telling us is essentially that God is, or the supreme creator of all things, source, is there's only one of it. However, it has split itself off into separate energies because we live in a realm of separation. So here there's separation, but on the other side there's no separation. The reason why there seems to be separation is from what I'm understanding in the symbolism is that for some reason we wanted to have free will. There's some sort of benefit, I guess, that we gain by having free will and choosing what our higher self wants. Like because we come here with amnesia, so we don't know who we are. Like we come here with completely wiped memory, so we don't understand why we're here. We don't consciously understand. But if we can get to the point where we do understand why we're here and we can accomplish the goal that our higher self wanted to accomplish. So I found this quote. It's an Islamic quote, and it says, Allah the Exalted gave the angels intellect without desires. He gave the animals desires without intellect, and he gave both to humans. So a man whose intellect prevails over his desires is better than the angels, while a man whose desires prevails over his intellect is worse than the animals. And from what I'm seeing in the symbolism, it all seems to line up with this idea of we wanted to have free will so that we could sit like an exam or like a test. We either pass or we fail. To pass means that we, like it says, we become better than the angels because the angels don't have free will. And to fail means we're basically worse than the animals because the animals don't have an overriding mechanism, and that is choice. Because we have choice, we can choose, because we are a transitional creature that can choose to either dwell in our lower animal desires or raise our consciousness high enough to unlock our dormant DNA and become fully human. We're not actually fully human because we have dormant DNA that's just dormant, and so we haven't unlocked it yet. And so in order for us to have free will, what I'm reading that's very clear to me in the symbolism is that God had to separate from us. Like there had to become separation because otherwise there's no free will. If there's no separation, then we have the constant guidance, God's constant guidance. Like if you watch the film Heart of Stone, it's on Netflix, probably like one of the best films to understand this. The charter in the film is the soul, and the heart, well, it's the heart. They actually call it the heart. So the charter is guided by the heart, and that's how the charter accomplishes all its goals. As soon as the heart goes offline, the charter is lost. God's spirit went offline so that we could have separation, therefore free will, to decide who we want to become in this state of amnesia. The thing that I would disagree with this quote, this one that talks about, he gave the animals desires without intellect. It's just another example of putting the focus on the intellect. And that's fine because we are in a simulation, we are sitting on like an exam. We're not supposed to be given all the answers. Imagine going into an exam and sitting down and the teacher just handing out the answers to every single student. Everyone would be like, what's the point? Why are we even wasting our time here if you're going to do that? Here we are, we have free will to choose whether do we want to dwell in our lower animal nature, or do we want to rise above and get back in contact with God? Obviously, in order for it to be fair and for everyone to sit the test in a fair way, there has to be information that's hidden from us. We can't know everything, otherwise, what's the point? So the heart is the big secret. The biggest secret in the world is being told to us subliminally. We can't understand subliminal language if we're making those choices to dwell in our lower animal nature. It's God's spirit that wakes up our ability to decipher subliminal language. In the Quran, it says something about God blinding the disbelievers and putting a veil over their eyes. And, when it comes to the word belief, there seems to be this consistent theme among a lot of religions that, and it's about belief. And where does belief, when you talk about belief, you're talking about the brain, you're talking about the intellect. So, like in Christianity, for example, the emphasis is on believing and repenting. But it's like if you believe that Jesus died for your sins, then you're saved.
So you
Um,
just have to believe that, and that's it.
when I look into religion, I see half truths everywhere. I don't In the past, when I was less like knowledgeable or whatever, in the past I used to think, oh, that's wrong, that's right, that's a lie, that's the truth. You start to realize everything is a half truth,
Hmm.
and you need to bring back in all those things that you thought were full on like deceptions and lies, and look for the truth within them. So when it comes to this idea of believing, oh, if you believe this, you'll go to heaven or whatever. So it's about belief, belief, belief. And the belief leads you to think that it's all about up here in the brain. Well, the other day I found this quote from, I think it was from one of the hadiths, one of the Islamic hadiths. And it said, the Messenger of Allah said, by him whose hand is my life, you will not enter Jannah until you believe, and you will not believe until you love one another. So what is that telling you about what belief really is?
Mm,
It,
it's like
it there's
embodiment, right?
exactly, it's not just about the intellect. There's more to it. Because if it says you will not believe until you love one another, what is that a connecting belief to? It's connecting the heart to it. So
Mm,
the heart has got a lot to do with belief. And I mean, come on, like just logically speaking, like who in their right mind thinks that God's going to let someone into heaven just because they believed the right thing with their intellect over someone who was maybe an atheist, but was far more compassionate, far more kind, far more honest, far more loyal, but they're going to go to hell. And the one who believed with the mind is going to go to heaven. I don't think there's a single person on earth that really, really deep down inside believes that. And it's such a simple message, especially because it's the message that you get from watching all the children's movies. There's so much emphasis on the heart, being kind, and this is like almost in all movies, like the good guy usually wins.
mm,
We live in a world where we've stopped believing that. Like we become adults and we stop believing that the good guy always wins because we look around us and we just see that the more selfish you are, the more self-centered you are, the more corruptible you are, the more greedy you are, the more successful you tend to be. It's those people who are winning. Our whole lives, we're so used to seeing that if you're kind and good, it's hard to become successful because people who are successful are usually just focused on themselves, focused on their skills, focused on it's all about them, them, them. And because they're so focused on themselves, they usually have the time, the energy, the resources to accomplish the things they're trying to accomplish. So we stopped believing that the good guys win, but what we're missing is that the end hasn't come yet. So we're still in the middle of the story. The end comes at the end of the cycles. History is templates and cycles. So right now we're approaching the end of an age, and there is going to be an end point. And that's when a lot of people are going to unfortunately look back and wish they did things differently because they didn't know, but they're not supposed to know. That's the thing. If you go and sit an exam and everyone gets a cheat sheet, what's the point in being there? We're not really supposed to know. And I've had people say to me, well, if we're not supposed to know, why are you telling us this? And I'm like, well, because we're not anyone in a position of authority. We're not politicians. We're not scientific experts. We're not the Pope. We're not. So we can talk and people can just think we're crazy.
that's true. It's almost like the truth is protected by heart frequency, and those who lack purity in the heart won't resonate with the truth, and therefore they're not given that gift of understanding what this really is until they do work on opening their heart and whatever else is involved in that, and getting out of the carnal region.
Well, that's
And
where the Katabasis comes into it. Yeah, go on.
I wanted to ask you, so explain the katabasis. I think a lot of people would say, oh, does that mean you can't be involved in intercourse because that's your lower chakra? Like, explain a bit about what carnal desires are and then how to rise above that, and whether that means
Yeah.
you have to be celibate or what.
In some esoteric traditions, there is this belief that in order to raise the Kundalini energy or to activate, to align your chakras and all these, to activate your dormant DNA and things like that, that you need to completely, um, you have to be celibate, and it's almost like you're not using your lower chakras at all. But in fact, and this is something I know because I see it over and over and over and over and over again in symbolism, it's very clear that the lower chakras are dualistic. So they're dualistic chakras. So they can be used for good and bad. They can be used in good ways and bad ways. So what we're trying to do is close off the ways that are bad. Like obviously we don't want to be indulging in things. We need to find balance, and we need to be doing things, we don't want to be gluttonous. We don't want to be lustful. We don't want to misuse the lower chakras. And it's all about closing the portal so that the lower chakras are now are not no longer dualistic. And that's when you can get the chakra alignment, because by closing the portal, that means because the portal it goes through into your heart. Like that's where the portal is.
Yeah.
So once you close that portal, now your lower chakras are not dualistic anymore. Your heart is open, and your soul is no longer locked in your solar plexus, and it's able to rise up past your throat chakra, past your heart chakra. Then you've got to make sure that this is being open as well. It's part of the heart chakra because it's the throat chakra, and it's like the oil that floats on water. It expresses what's in the heart. Once you pass that, now the soul can rise all the way to the optic thalamus. To get to that point, and this is where we go into the katabasis. So the katabasis is something that is so important to understand. It's so incredibly important because it's once you start to decode and things like that properly, you start to see it absolutely everywhere. And you'll see it in world events, like not just movies and things, but you'll see it in world events, like things that we've just recently lived through. 2020, 2021. What do you think that was about? That was about a mass katabasis experience to wake the world up.
Mm.
And that's exactly what happened. And I'm not just saying that. I know it's what happened because I was doing vaccine rights activism since 2013. I was really involved. That's when I was starting to wake up. That's when I started to realize that there was a proper effort, like a systematic effort to damage the health and lives of children through vaccines. The community was being gaslit, was being silenced, and it's a community that's in a lot of suffering, and the world was just deaf to their cries. It was mostly parents, like suffering parents, people screaming in a vacuum, being
Gaslit parents.
gaslit majorly by the media and everyone that just blindly believes the media.
Mm.
And it was heart-wrenching. It was so heart-wrenching. And it wasn't until they came for the adults with the syringes. It wasn't until then that the world began to really wake up to what was happening, to the fact that essentially we're being lied to, and a lot of people's like reality came crashing down. So a katabasis is essentially a going down, a descent. It could be like it is psychological, but it can be portrayed in films and stories as an actual death and a resurrection. Like a lot of the time, it's a death and a resurrection. Sometimes it's a falling and then being rescued at the bottom, or sometimes it's a crash of someone's belief systems. Sometimes it's a grieving experience. It's whatever it is that leads you to descend into a type of hell and have a transformation. And then you have the anabasis, which is the ascent. And so every time you go down and you come back up, you've had a transformation, you've had a transformative experience, which essentially what that's saying is that it's through suffering that we evolve and that we transform. It's we actually need to suffer. We need to have a reason to start to question our existence, to question our reality, to have that experience in the first place. Otherwise, we're just walking around,
Mm.
not even it's not even in our peripheral vision to care about certain things. So
Is it like a
um
dark night of the soul experience?
exactly.
Yeah.
So what usually happens in this world is that people will either have a katabasis and stay down there because let's say they got cheated on by a partner, right? They have a katabasis because they had a big shock, and now they're grieving and they feel betrayed, and
They're stuck
and
in
so
resentment, anger, all that kind of.
exactly, they
Yeah.
can get stuck in that resentment, anger, unforgiveness, bitterness, all that. Or they can then use that experience to propel them into a higher state of being, into a transformative experience to change and evolve and grow. And that's usually the choice that we have. We have either we can stay in hell or we can come back from the dead essentially. And when we do back from the dead, there's something that happens. There's something different now. There's something that we have that we didn't have before, or we have some sort of power that we didn't have before. We can access something we couldn't access before. There's something has changed. And you see that in symbolism over and over again.
Mm.
And so what we went through with the whole lockdowns and the jabs and everything was a mass katabasis. Now, for some people, it didn't work. I mean, I can't explain why. It's a mystery to me, but for some people, it didn't work. For a lot of people, it didn't work. And for a lot of people, it did work because we saw a huge shift. We saw a massive shift. For someone like me and others who have been, you know, in that movement for so long, we saw the shift, we saw the change, we saw what happened. 2017, we would be lucky to get 200 people in the park to protest against, mandatory vaccination for children. By the end of it, we had, over 100,000 people coming to a protest that only a few years prior we would only get 200, because now everyone was being affected by this. To this day, if we never went through that experience, people would not have had that katabasis. They would still be walking around more unconscious than they are now.
Mm.
A lot of people we meet, they tell us that their awakening started in 2020, 2021. It's so common now to hear people say that.
And would you say for the people who are still stuck in the anger and resentment and I guess disbelief about what happened and what they went through, they haven't come up yet. They haven't come through the heart and had a transformation yet. They have an awareness now and an awakening, but to say that they've come out the other end transformed, would you say that more needs to be done when it comes to the heart?
Definitely, I think it's part of the process. It's a natural part of the process when you realize, oh my gosh, we've been lied to. I remember in 2013 how angry I was when I realized that the world wasn't what I thought it was, that we weren't being told the truth, that they deliberately withhold information from, medical school curriculum so that doctors are not as effective in treating and curing diseases. And like that, I was pretty angry about that. And because I experienced it for myself, I was sick. I spent a lot of money on specialists, did a lot of tests, and in the end, it was a naturopath. And he literally got me to fill out a questionnaire, and he was able to diagnose me from a questionnaire and fix me. And I started to experience the best health I had experienced in like over 10 years, best sleep, everything. Like my health started to come back, and I was like, wow. Sometimes I will run into people who are still talking as if it's 2020, 2021. They're still talking as if no time has passed. They're still stuck down there in hell.
Yeah.
And so it's totally natural, and there should be I don't think there's any shame in admitting that you got angry about it. No one likes to be lied to. No one likes that feeling of realizing that they were lied to. and they fell for a lie. And it's totally natural to feel angry, and you should let yourself feel angry.
Mm.
But but that's not the end. Like we have to use that negative experience to propel us into a higher state of being. And every time we do that, because the dark nights of the soul, that they're continuous. Ask anyone who's been on the truth seeking journey for a long time, they'll tell you it's one after another after another. It's not just one big one. And so every time you have a dark night of the soul and you realize another layer, you uncover another layer of truth, you're naturally going to have another dark night of the soul. And every time you come out of that dark night of the soul, if you can come out of it, you're closing that portal to the unconscious realm a little bit more every time you rise above and you allow yourself to be transformed by it.
It's great that people could see what was going on and it worked them up to a lot of the corruption and the deception that we had been living for a long time. However, we also have to consider that there are deeper meanings to all of this. And we still have to have discernment whilst also reading the symbolism at the same time. We need to get to a point where instead of becoming reactive and defensive, we know what to do, we know how to handle the situation, we know how to protect ourselves, rise above it, but we're also receiving the hidden messages underneath all of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point because you can't just say, oh, it's just symbolism, so I'm not going to do anything or I'm not going to say anything because it's just symbolism. I mean, honestly, if you were at that stage anyway and you could see the symbolism, that means your heart chakra is open enough to want to do the right thing anyway. It's got to be a balance of both. You've got to be able to see, for example, what's happening in Palestine. That is symbolism. But just because it's symbolism, that doesn't mean that we don't do anything about it. That doesn't mean that in fact, that would be the absolute worst thing we could do. Um, we're supposed to, like, these situations give us opportunities for growth, give us opportunities for when they started the collective punishment process in Palestine. I can't think of really many things worse than collective punishment. Like, that's so incredibly moral. If you're not against collective punishment, your heart chakra is closed, period. So someone who isn't against what has been going on in Palestine is probably never going to see the symbolism until they have an ego death, something that's not going to be very pleasant, in order for them to open their heart chakra enough to see that collective punishment is just immoral. But once you can see it for what it is, the challenge is, okay, well, they've made it really hard for us to speak out. They've made it really hard for us to be against collective punishment publicly and to speak for those who have lost their voice and those who are vulnerable, innocent, being attacked. They've made it so hard. I lost over 20,000 followers on my main account from speaking out against the collective punishment in Palestine. That's a challenge that they've given us to overcome. And
Mm.
then so if you can prove that you can be trusted with something, you'll be trusted with something deeper later. Do something, don't be complacent, obviously, but your actions and your words will be guided how much you understand what's happening. When you understand its symbolism, you'll still do what's right, but understand at the same time its symbolism, and that the way to prevent these kinds of situations is to understand the symbolism and to expose the symbolism as well. So understanding it and having the courage to expose it and bring it into the light, because sunlight kills pathogens.
Even though you can see something or you know the conspiracies or you're reading the symbolism or whatever, that's not enough. You need to take action, exactly how you're explaining. And we could have kept that information to ourselves. We could have kept it in our little conspiracy groups, in our little white pill group or code crackers group, and just protected ourselves and each to their own. But we didn't do that. We put ourselves out there selflessly, knowing we were going to be ridiculed and called crazy. We still did it because we could see the signs that they couldn't see. And that, again, is showing the status of one's heart and showing that the opinions and perspectives of others of you are much lower than your care and concern for everyone else.
Exactly. Yeah, we need to live to impress God, not other people in the simulation. Because when you do that, if you're trying to impress people, and we saw a lot of that, we saw a lot of people who could see what we could see, but they were afraid to speak out just in case we did foil it and then it didn't happen. And then they'd feel like they have egg on their face. The problem there is, well, guess what? Someone's looking. God knows the heart. Like, you're worried about what people think. You should be a lot more worried about what God thinks, because God's watching and God can see the state of your heart. God can see the condition of your heart. What people need to really wrap their heads around is the fact that these events are symbolic rituals. A lot of people understand that,
Yes.
but they don't understand what the symbol, like, okay, 9/11, everyone knows. Almost everyone knows that was a symbolic ritual.
Mm.
What was it symbolizing? They don't know. They're telling us what the alternate timeline could be. It's the same thing everywhere, everywhere you look. Once you can understand to a degree symbolism, you start to realize it's the same message everywhere. It's essentially about your soul being in a state of entrapment and your ability to free your soul, unite it with the spirit, and unlocking your dormant DNA and essentially bringing the highest level of God into this realm, which is where the magic happens. When you realize that all the symbolism is telling you about what you have the potential to achieve inside of yourself with the things that you can control, like your own body, your own heart, your own mind, you start to realize, like, they're telling us what the alternate timeline is, which is a timeline where people activate their dormant DNA. It's all about the DNA activation, and it's all about it happening through the heart. It's all about the heart being a key, being the key to DNA activation. And DNA activation means gaining access to a power, a higher power that we have, that you will have the authority to access, provided your heart is pure enough. This is how the pyramids were built.
The more we ignore what's inside of us, the more disaster we're going to see play out outside of us. And if we can continue to focus to evolve and open the heart, activate our dormant DNA, I guess that puts us on a timeline where there doesn't need to be suffering and destruction to occur in order to be a catalyst to wake us up to what we're not doing within. And I think the Los Angeles fires, when they happened and we started to look back, because we knew there would have been symbolism for it. I saved a little highlight reel of some of the things that we found that were foreshadowing this event.
At the end of the day, unless we're there and we're receiving all the symbolism because it's being targeted at us through the algorithms, it's hard to say how easy it would have been to spot. I
Mm,
think the reason why November 8 was so easy to spot was because it was meant to be so big. Like, all that symbolism was not put out there for a grass fire at Sydney Airport and a burst water pipe.
yeah,
And I mean, it ticked all the boxes of the symbolism, but it was so small in
and
comparison to what the symbolism was foreshadowing it to be.
yeah.
And I really think that it was because it was meant to be so big. And when you look at even like all the events that were happening on the 8 days, like the 17th, the 26th, the harbour turning green. And then as we approach November 8, like, all our followers were anticipating, oh, something's going to happen on the 17th, something's going to happen on the 26th, something's going to happen. And lo and behold, something would happen. And as we got closer to the November 8th, each thing got bigger and bigger. Like, it was definitely building up. You could see the build up happening. And I remember, like, 2.5 months before, I remember thinking, if we're right about November 8th, we should see the symbolism escalating, and we should see it increasing as we get closer to the day. And that's exactly what happened. So 7 days before, it went up another notch, and then 24 hours before, it went up another notch again. And the night before was insane. Like, it was a really difficult night for a lot of people because everyone was sharing what they were experiencing and what they were noticing and what they were observing in their areas or at their work or in the media. And it was absolutely diabolical how much was there. I wasn't even checking my messages. It was just too heart-wrenching. It was probably the worst night of my life and the worst night for a lot of people. There were people whose kids couldn't sleep because there were helicopters doing circles right above their houses in suburban areas and just doing circles for hours. There were
Mm,
people whose car alarms were going off for no reason. My emergency weather radio went off for the first time since I owned it. A year and a half prior, I had bought it, and it's been in my house every single night. And it went off at 10:30 p.m. and it was really loud. It scared the absolute I've never been so scared in my life than when that alarm went off, because I was trying to convince myself, oh, nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen, because I couldn't even like fathom the idea of it going ahead. And then that went off and I literally like almost peed my pants. Like it's almost hard to believe that people couldn't see it.
Mm.
For all of those of us who could see the symbolism, it's really hard for us to imagine that anyone could not see it. Anyone that was living here couldn't see it. It was literally screaming at us like there was no tomorrow. There was, you couldn't even go online. I couldn't even scroll. I couldn't do anything, especially 24 hours before. It was just incredibly overwhelming. And I just think, wow, the fact that we were pointing it out, we're going to make a documentary about this one day, and we're going to show the symbolism, and people are going to have to look at it again, and the fact that people were in denial about it and saying that it was, I mean, that tells you a lot. The fact that we packaged it up for them and served it to them on a silver platter and they still couldn't see it. And it says a lot about their capacity to understand subliminal language. And that's got to do with the heart. It's a sign of spiritual deafness and blindness.
Would you say that COVID was also symbolic of the heart, or the vaccines, I should say?
100%. You got lockdown, masks. So being locked down in your house, you got masks, you got a virus, and you've got a cure for the virus, or so-called preventative measure, which they called a vaccine. Look at all those different elements. Firstly, you've got a virus. The virus represents the portal to the unconscious realm.
Because you can't
And
see it. It's invisible.
that's right. It exists in our hidden reality. The hidden reality is much more stronger than the obvious reality. So when you look up in the sky, you've got the sun and the moon, and I mean, even I made the mistake of thinking that the sun had more of an impact on us than the moon. Like, it's not true at all. The moon actually has a subconscious effect on us. And if you think that the sun affects us because we can go out there and get burnt by it, imagine what's happening with the moon, because it's even stronger. It has an even greater effect on us than the sun, but it's happening inside in our hidden reality. And one of the reasons why there is this whole debate about whether or not viruses exist. In fact, most debates, if you have a look, do vaccines cause autism? Don't they cause autism? Are viruses real? Aren't they? Are they not real? Is fluoride good for the teeth, or is it bad for the health, for our health? Oh, climate change. Is climate change real or not? Is it man-made or not? All these, like, there's symbolism. You'll find symbolism in any of these massive debates.
In
In this
controversies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you'll find symbolism in all these controversies. So you got a virus, and do viruses exist or not? And that's because
The
it,
other one is Lyme disease too. Don't
oh,
forget
that's a big one. Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So Lyme
Sorry to
disease,
interrupt.
because it's green. Yeah, Lyme is green. And so, yeah, so the virus represents I think the Muslims would refer to it as the dot in the heart. I would call it the portal that is dormant. So even cancer represents this as well, because it's like a dormant cell. The virus, it latches onto hosts and it spreads. And so it's the unconscious realm. It's our connection to the unconscious realm through that portal that we need to close off. So you got the virus, and now the first action is lockdown to prevent the virus from being spread. That's about your soul being locked in your solar plexus. And that's why Melbourne was the most locked down city in the world, because the solar plexus of the earth is in Australia. It's considered to be Uluru in the center of Australia. So because that's what happens when you leave that portal open or you widen it, is that you essentially lock the soul from rising up through the heart chakra. So it's locked in the solar plexus. And so you've got that. Then you got the masks. And so the mask is about preventing, it's about becoming an obstacle, and the air represents the spirit. And so air, wind, water, glass, mirrors, ice, gas,
Wind.
sorry,
Wind as
wind.
well. Yeah.
Exactly. They represent the spirit. And then you've got the vaccine. That's supposed to be the answer, the big answer to fixing the pandemic. And so because it's something that pricks your skin, and what we see over and over again in symbolism is that there's like the spindle, the mosquito, the knife, things that pierce, things that stab and pierce. It sends you into the katabasis. It's the catalyst that triggers the katabasis, because essentially the katabasis is the cure, because you have to have the katabasis to have the anabasis. So to have the transformation, you have to suffer. So it's the ego. It's about killing the ego. It's about the ego death. the old self dies, the new self is born. That's in so there's so much symbolism surrounding that. I mean, look at baptism, the death and resurrection. The vaccine represents the catalyst for the katabasis,
Mm.
like the poison apple. So many people had a katabasis experience. This woke up a lot of people to a degree. Like I said before, it's not just one dark night of the soul. It's not just one descent into hell. There's this thing called secondhand trauma. So you can actually experience a katabasis just by empathizing with the suffering of others. The problem is that we lack empathy. There's not a lot of empathy in the world. There's not a lot of compassion in the world. Most people are actually quite selfish and self-centered. If we don't bring the shadow into the light, it remains a shadow forever. The first way to fix a problem is to acknowledge that it exists in the first place. If you're not even going to acknowledge the existence of the darkness of this world, of your own darkness within you, and of the unresolved issues in your relationships and in your life, you're probably not going to experience much growth in your life.
Mm.
The katabasis is meant to propel you into that direction, to ask those big questions. Why am I here? What am I doing here? Why is there suffering? And to pursue enlightenment, to pursue, essentially immortality. There's this film called Lucy with Scarlett Johansson. And in the beginning, Morgan Freeman's character says something along the lines of, when the environment, I'm trying to remember it, when the environment is good, the animals focus on procreation. And when it's bad, the focus is immortality.
Mm.
So when everything is good and we're not experiencing a katabasis, we're more focused on the material things in life, the things that are fleeting, the things that aren't forever. We've cracked some major codes, but it's nothing compared to what there is waiting to be cracked. It's like
Mm.
we've just opened the door a little bit tiny open and into this vast territory, this uncharted territory. We will only have the time to be able to explore like a tiny bit of it.
Yeah, that's a lot for one podcast, I think, and we're going to try to do these weekly, but we also want to do a class setting where we're showing you how we're decoding movies and series and stuff like that. So that will be on like a Spotify membership program because it's going to be like our job, but it's only going to be what, like a couple of dollars a month or something just to help us survive as we decode. But also, Annette, I don't know if you guys know, she had a really viral account, which she's been locked out of since talking about the 811 stuff. And that was her main source of income, getting donations through that so that she can run her sanctuary and feed her animals, help her animals. A lot of them need medical support and it's not cheap. So if you want to give back for all the effort that Annette's put in to help you understand a lot of this and you feel called to support her on her journey, so that she can devote more of her time and energy into this, feel free to send her a donation, which I'll add in the description, the link. And yeah, don't feel frustrated if you're struggling to understand a lot of this, if you're getting triggered. Just remain observant and suspend your beliefs long enough to let this stuff sort of sink in. You may not get it straight away. I've had people say to me in the beginning, I did not understand any of this, and it was going way over my head. Now I'm getting it. And those are the people who suspend their beliefs long enough to allow their consciousness or whatever it is, whatever happens in that process, to actually start to let it in, and so that they can actually experience for themselves what we're saying, what we're showing. So patience is required. And if you're trying to force stuff, that's your ego. So don't try and force it. And another thing to note is we're learning as we go. We're discovering things every day on the daily. Me and Annette are sending stuff to each other and we're realizing new stuff. So you're just witnessing our journey of how we're discovering things. And things might change or evolve from what we used to believe, or what we have a bigger picture now from the new information that we have. So don't cling on to ideas. Always keep an open mind as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and what we're trying to do here is we're trying to keep it simple. Like if you guys could see the text messages that we send each other throughout the day, we could easily just be sharing everything with you guys. We're trying really hard to simplify, simplify, simplify because everything needs context. Really, this needs to be a course and it needs to have levels.
Thanks for your time in it. And hopefully people support you because you've You've been very selfless with your time and your knowledge and your wisdom.
I've found personally that the more we share, the more we're shown.